anti-Semitism in football. Is it a serious issue? How seriously is it taken? Why are there so few Jewish footballers? Just want to have a conversation about it, really. And any thoughts you have, the text number is 81089. We'll do it in the company of the writer Ivor Badil and the journalist from The Athletic, Adam Crafton, who are both on the line now. Ivor, morning.
Hello, Max. How are you?
Yeah, nice to talk to you. Hey, Adam, nice to talk to you too.
Good morning.
Thanks so much for coming on. And we wanted to cover this, I think, because we haven't really heard that many people talking about this particular subject. And we've spent a lot of time talking about the Black Lives Matter movement and racism within football. And we sort of touched on the racial abuse of Heung-min Son as well. But we haven't really talked about this particular subject. And I suppose, the first question, Ivor, is it an issue in football?
Yeah, it is an issue. It flares up every so often. I've been part of a campaign to, sort of eradicate particularly the use of the Y word for a long time, and it sort of flares up. The fact is, off the top of my head, I can think of Joe Jacobson at Wickham, and there's maybe one or two other Jewish footballers, and there's all sorts of possible cultural reasons why there aren't that many Jewish footballers. And the issue, there's no getting away from it. It does focus on and centre around Tottenham, but it is still an issue when you've got upwards of, I don't know the capacity of the new stadium now, but 50,000 predominantly non-Jews, and that's an important point to make.
Mm-hmm.
The vast majority of Tottenham fans are not Jewish. Using a pejorative term for Jews, it's still using it, and other fans chanting it back at them. Yes, it is very much still an issue.
Adam, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I'd agree. In terms of why there's not that many Jewish footballers in the UK, I think, that's partly because there's just not that many Jewish people in the UK. I think it's something like 0.5% of the population on the latest census. I think that's one of the reasons. And there's a number of different cultural reasons. I grew up in North Manchester and, had a lot of friends who played in football teams, but actually quite often in younger age groups, Jewish kids play in teams that are Jewish-only football teams. Mm-hmm. And that almost goes back to their parents' generation, where it was almost as a sign of safety, that we'll have this team together and therefore, we'll be able to defend ourselves a little bit. I think that's probably less necessary these days, but it is something that's been passed on down generations and very much still exists.
I think it's interesting to say. Do butt in. We'll listen.
No, I just wanted to say on a slightly more humorous note that I've played obviously in Jewish football teams, and if you think of the lowest level of football and then go down about 3 levels.
Let's talk about the Y word then to begin with, because I sort of mistakenly thought, originally, Ivor, that it was it was sort of similar to sort of hip-hop stars co-opting the N-word and using it sort of as a term of empowerment. But the key there is that, as you say, it's a very small percentage of Tottenham fans who are Jewish, so it's not the same.
No, it's not the same at all. And the other thing to bear in mind, that as far as I know, in the black community, the use of hip-hop rap stars using the N-word is divisive. It's not,
of course,
that it's universally, that everybody thinks is a good thing. But it's their community, it's their word to reclaim. Whereas the thing is, it's not. If all the people chanting it were Jewish, that would be a slightly different issue. But you've got non-Jew, and it's sort of quite complicated. I'm not suggesting that all these non-Jewish Tottenham fans chanting the Y word are being knowingly anti-Semitic, but they are being offensive. And actually now it's been in campaigns for the last 10 years or so. I would argue they are, because people know about it now, they are being knowingly offensive. So, but the crucial thing is it's not their word to reclaim. So it leads to, apart from anything else, it leads to a lot of confusion. So I've made this analogy before, but if I'm a Jewish Tottenham fan walking down the street and someone comes up to me and calls me a Y word, I'd have to say to them, are you calling me that because I'm Jewish or because I'm a Tottenham fan? So I need to know first to find out whether I'm offended. So it leads to that sort of ridiculous confusion. And that, in the eyes of other football fans, leads them to chant some absolutely, I'm sure we all know, and I'm not going to repeat them, some shocking chants. But even the worst of them, actually, I'm going to say one, even the worst of them, which is like people hissing and Spurs are on the way to Auschwitz and things like that, I would argue it's got so confusing But there are some people who chant that who think they're just having a go at Tottenham fans. They don't even realise that they're being anti-Semitic, and that's how ridiculous the confusion has got.
Yeah, in your excellent film for Kick It Out, Ivor, you do cut between that song and images of Auschwitz, and it really hits you over the head with why you shouldn't be singing that. Do you think some people, as you say, the meaning has been lost, and it is just something they sing, it's something they do, it's something their dads did or mums did, and that's why it's sort of carried on? It's like a folk song almost.
Yeah, I mean, I can almost feel Tottenham fans' pain, because it's something they identify with, and they think they're doing a good thing, and I think that was the thought behind it. But unfortunately, in this day and age, it does cause huge offence, and I think it's had its day, really.
Adam, I mean, racism's not a competition, right? There's not one that's worse than another, or we have to take them all equally seriously. But having said that, do you think that we don't take anti-Semitism as seriously, perhaps?
I don't know. I mean, when people say that to me, do we take anti-Semitism seriously? I'm always wary of that, because, who am I to generalise what millions of people think in their own head? All we can judge is people's words and actions. I think in the case of the Tottenham situation, they did a consultation with their fans, I think, earlier on this season. Is it still this season? And I think 94% of correspondents, I think there was about 24,000 replied to it, 94% of correspondents said that they could recognise that the Y word could be deemed to be a racist insult. Now, I don't like comparing to other minority groups, but I think if that was any other minority group, it is difficult for me to imagine that a set of fans would continue to sing that, having themselves recognised that it could be deemed to be a racist insult. I think it brings other complications as well, because when a set of supporters almost wrap the flag around themselves, it almost provides this excuse or mitigation for rival fans who use it in a more pejorative manner with a different intent to sing certain songs. So, I've been at Chelsea games and at Arsenal games, Man United games, where you will hear certain things sung about the Y word in relation to Tottenham fans, and I don't think they're using it to be anti-Semitic. They're using it to be anti-Tottenham. However, to a lot of people hearing it, it is just the Y word, and it's to me as a Jewish person, it's not right. I think something like 5% of Spurs season ticket holders are Jewish, so it's not their word necessarily to reclaim anyway.
Text coming in saying, how is the Y word, which is short for Yiddish, in any way analogous to the N words? It's like getting offended by the word Brit. I don't agree with that text, Ivor, but I think it's worth explaining that, Ivor.
Well, it's how words are used. You can make the same argument about the P word. It's just short for Pakistani. So you could say, well, what's wrong with that? But it's the way it's being used. I mean, in Nazi Germany, the Y word was used against Jews, and if somebody comes up, in some senses, it almost doesn't matter what the word. I mean, the word Jew itself is almost is used pejoratively. In playgrounds, calling somebody a Jew, not even putting an adjective before it. Can sometimes be not sometimes, is often offensive in the way it's used. So it's the way words are used. Of course, they have other meanings. I mean, the word means sort of bloke or chap in Yiddish, as far as I know. There's even a magazine which has that word as a title, but that's completely different. That's not being used in order to offend.
Sure.
There's no bad words, bad intentions, I suppose, the bad intention behind it.
You're listening to talkSPORT. Ivor Badil, Adam Crafton with us. If you guys are happy to hang around for the next few minutes, we'll carry on talking about anti-Semitism in football. Or you're listening to talkSPORT. John, the writer Ivor Badil, Adam Crafton from The Athletic on this subject. Ivor, we've had a few messages talking about, from Spurs fans saying, look, this is, the reason that Tottenham fans have used the Y word is to diffuse racism launched by other teams. So focus on those responsible for the anti-Semitism rather than people sort of trying to do it in a sort of solidarity sense.
Okay, but the thing is, that's all good and well, but it hasn't worked. You see, that's the point. If that was the original reason for doing it, it's been going on for, I don't know, since the 50s and 60s. So let's give them the benefit there and say, fine, okay, you did it to try and diffuse racism, anti-Semitism, but it hasn't worked. It's inflamed it. It's made it worse. So surely, if that was your aim, that's the experiment, then, how many more years? You give it another 50 years and see if it works? It clearly hasn't worked. Whereas, in the black community, reclaiming the N-word, by and large, apart from out-and-out Nazis, that, people know it has worked. But, the Tottenham experiment, or using it as a badge of honour, or however they want to say to diffuse racism, it hasn't worked. So, nice try, but forget it.
Adam?
Yeah, I think with Tottenham, what I would like to see is some greater clarity, actually, coming from the club and coming from, I suppose, supporters groups as well. I think they've always been. The message has never been very clear on whether this term is acceptable or not. It's always been a consultation. But I think, once a set of fans respond to you saying 94% can see why this word could be seen as a racist insult, I would say that's quite conclusive. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'm at with it. I think it goes broader, though, beyond Tottenham. I think it's still... I've been on trains with West Ham fans on the way to games. Like I said, I've been at Arsenal games, Man United games, Man City games, where you will just hear things, and you will hear the way that certain chairmen are described at certain points, very much laced with stereotypes and tropes. So I think it goes beyond just Tottenham and the Y word.
Can we talk about calling it out? This is sort of a difficult part of all these discussions, is what fans should do in their seat, because it is easy for us in a warm studio to say that, we would call it out. But, I've been in positions when I've heard things and I haven't called it out because I maybe haven't been brave enough. Like, do you think we should start? And I come from, I'm sort of half Jewish. My dad was born Jewish and stopped, so I'm not officially Jewish, but I'm sort of Jewish, I guess. But I haven't been brave enough to call it out. Is that something that I need to do and fans need to do, Ivor?
Well, it's very difficult. Interestingly, the Wiley thing recently was very interesting because it depends what you mean by calling it out. I think, this day and age, it's very easy to call things out online. But actually, in the context of football, the reason the whole Y word thing started was, I did call out a guy who was chanting it behind me at Chelsea, this was years ago, and I hated it. I'm not, believe it or not, I'm not a violent, aggressive person, and I avoid those sort of confrontations. But that particular day, it got to me, and I stood up, and it never got physical, but there was a bit of a shouting thing, and my heart was pumping, and so it's more, you can't expect individual people to get involved on that level. It's as Adam said, I think the lead has to come from the clubs and the authorities. Stewards need training to deal with it.
Ivor, I think that's where, over the last couple of years, I think Chelsea's campaign against anti-Semitism as a club it's probably been the best example of an individual club taking on a prejudice that I can recall. They've worked both with the community, with their own sets of fans, even those fans that they found to be, to have committed what you would call anti-Semitic acts. They've engaged with them in trying to educate them. They've not simply just said, we cast you aside and we give up on you. They've said, let's try and put you through some training and education, and let's try and all come out of this as better people, which I think is the best way to go about it. And I think you're absolutely right.
You're right. I was slightly avoiding saying that because one of the things that's happened over the years, with, me and obviously the people know David much better than me. They know we're Chelsea fans. So in this campaign, a lot of people have attacked us with, even Chelsea fans having a go at Spurs fans. And it's got nothing to do with us being Chelsea fans. It's to do with us being Jewish. And I wish people didn't know, we just happen to be Chelsea fans. We're doing it because we're Jewish, But you're right. I've been involved a little bit with the, Chelsea's campaign, and it's fantastic. It's absolutely brilliant. They're really, really dealing with it well.
Can I ask about representation then in sport? We sort of touched on it at the start, and before the show we were chatting about this and wondering why there aren't, as you said, it's not actually, it's a really small part of the population, and I actually think some people will be surprised about how few people in the country are Jewish. And do you think it is just that, or I wondered if it was, culturally, because in my mind, you know, Jewish people are sort of encouraged to go into education, and I wondered if I was sort of being slightly racist by even having that thought. I mean, this is the complexities we get into, Adam, I guess.
Yeah, but one of the things that I think is always quite interesting about a lot of stereotypes is stereotypes are often laced with a little bit of truth, aren't they? So I think, yeah, certainly the Jewish community I grew up in, a lot of people that I knew were encouraged to go into education. So you're absolutely right to think that. I also thought it was interesting that, you know, certainly around where I grew up in Manchester, you know, I knew some really talented Jewish footballers when they were younger, and they were in academies, big academies in the Northwest when they were maybe age 8 to 11 or 12, but then it just felt like education, social life, just things took over. But you're right, it's a very small part of the population. You know, there is Jewish representation in football. There's in positions of power and executive positions. There's Jewish agents that we're aware of. And again, you know, I think when, you know, if you were to have said that at the start, you might have said the same thing again. You feel like you're being a little bit stereotypical, but it's also true that there are Jewish people in positions of power within football, within the clubs in the Premier League.
Ivor, would you go with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one thing that astonishes me is that I think I'm right in saying that 20% of Nobel Prize winners have been Jewish. And given that we're, whatever that you said, 0.05% of the population, that is absolutely staggering. But, you know, there's clearly a cultural reason for that. You know, Jewish people value education, you know, over athleticism, I guess. I mean, that can change clearly, but without a shadow of doubt, there's a cultural reason for it.
And I mean, I suppose, a bigger question broadly, you know, not just talking about Tottenham, but it's just how welcome Jewish people feel about going to football. And I sort of sense it's probably fine most of the time. Am I wrong to think that? I mean, it's hard for you guys, I guess, to speak for the entire community as well, Adam.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I remember about 18 months ago, I think there'd been it was the week where Raheem Sterling had been abused at Stamford Bridge in the Chelsea game, and then Chelsea went to play in Hungary, I think against ML Vidi, and Chelsea fans were accused, I think, by their own club that night of anti-Semitic chants about Tottenham. But I remember the week after Spurs played Arsenal at the Emirates, and there were Arsenal fans within the Emirates Stadium that night who actually called out their own supporters on the night, and it led to some pretty unpleasant confrontations between supporters on the night. And I remember talking to one of them the day after, and you know, they admitted like they were absolutely terrified to stand up and turn around and say, "Hang on a minute, that's not okay." And I do think there's been, you know, quite obviously a small number of Arsenal, Chelsea, maybe West Ham fans as well, who have felt increasingly uncomfortable, particularly on those European away trips where you can tend to get splinter groups that are, you know, a little bit more vocal, let's say, over these issues, who can make it quite unpleasant to be Jewish, because you hear things and you just think, you know, they're singing it about Tottenham, but they're singing it about me at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's education, right? You know,
Exactly.
Is it malicious, or are they just singing? You know, when you sing, are you just singing with part of a crowd and not really thinking? I guess either, which is not an excuse.
But that's where you get into the whole it's just banter type thing, which is, you know, doesn't just apply to the Jewish community. You know, that used to be the case, you know, with black football as well. It's just banter. You know, we're just having a laugh, and I can understand that, but it doesn't make it right. And you know, as I said earlier, you always feel the pain of part of you. I know you're having a laugh at all this, but you know, sorry to stop what you think is fun, but it's not fun. It's got a very serious side to it, and you know, it has to stop. You know, have banter, but have banter that doesn't offend people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's what's the sorry, go on.
A more topical point.
Yeah.
I mean, what's sort of incredible is that we had a situation a couple of weeks ago where a white reporter, you know, used the N-word on the BBC, and you know, used it in context, completely not, you know, trying to be racist at all, with the blessing of the family, and people went absolutely ballistic, you know. And if you compare that to 45 non-Jews chanting the Y word, again, you know, there is a parallel, not meaning to be anti-Semitic in the same way that reporter was not meaning to be racist. But, you know, the parallel, I think, is correct. You know, it's the same sort of situation. If a word is offensive, it's offensive or racist or anti-Semitic, whatever you want to call it, and you need to listen to the communities that are offended and stop it.
Listen, chaps, thanks so much for coming on. It's something we'll come back to because we want to. Ivor, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Cheers, Adam.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Take care.
Cheers. Adam Crafton there from The Athletic. Ivor Badil, the writer as well. You're listening to...
stronger message needs to come out from clubs and
but that's a key point that Ivor made, isn't it? It's like, if what you're doing is offensive, right, and people are saying, this is offending me, right, then you don't have to do it. It's really just stop doing it.
Yes.
Whatever the word is.
But it's fun. Well, that doesn't quite.
And like with all these things, the important thing is for me and Charlie to listen, right, to people's personal experiences, and we'll touch on all other subjects as well. Someone say, you're talking about this, why aren't you talking about that? Well, look, we can't do everything all at the same time, so we will cover lots of other serious subjects as well throughout the season. This is talkSPORT.
No one should be